The Massachusetts Miracle was a comprehensive reform act in Massachusetts, as Robert mentioned, passed in 1993. At the time, I think we were 35th in SAT scores in Massachusetts, and we then rose on the NAEP to the top, where we have remained, I say we because I used to be from Massachusetts, in every subject since then. So we have to ask, why did it work there and not other places? And I submit to you, it comes down to the shared commitments of its four architects. And you look at these guys at first, and yes, they're all white men, but this was 30 years ago. They appear to be incredibly different. Bill Weld, the Brahmin Republican governor, who ran against the entrenched state government epitomized by Senate President Bill Bulger, who grew up in the projects of South Boston. And you have Mark Roosevelt, the House Education Chair, who ran against Weld and called him these kinds of nasty things. And then lastly, you have Thomas Birmingham, the labor lawyer and Senate Chair, who grew up in hardscrabble Chelsea, right next to Boston. But they shared something very important, which is that they had all benefited from an exceptional education. They knew the opportunities and joys it had afforded them. And maybe more importantly, they shared a revulsion at the dismal performance of the state's K-12 system, and they were determined to correct it. I think we mock students when we claim to empower them when denying them the tools of influence. And these are not isolated incidents. In 2019, Okun's document was the centerpiece of a mandatory training for all New York City administrators, together responsible for educating 1 million kids. So what began to happen is that instead of starting with education, educators instead focused, as Robert alluded to, on trauma. Everyone was assumed to have suffered from trauma, and the first obligation was to heal the students. Well, first to heal the staff. So there was this solipsistic aspect of this. And then after that, to heal the students. And only then would we get around to actually educating kids. And districts and students were urged to lessen their academic expectations, relaxing lesson rigor, easing standards, lessening homework. The savage disparities of race and class worsened, and students' prospects on graduation dimmed. So in here, really, we have what becomes an inexhaustible excuse, because right in the past, we said in no excuses schooling that we would not make excuses for low outcomes. But the pledge has been revoked because racism is pervasive, it's virulent, it is everywhere, but we can't wait until we have vanquished racism to fix the schools.
The term no excuses is a classic case of that term has been won. It went from meaning the adults would not make excuses for not doing right by not taking the responsibility for students, and now it's become co-opted to mean some sort of a misappropriation of authority on the part of adults.
It became code for harsh discipline.
Yes, exactly. The apotheosis of that, when you share that data, I have been in that school. Not the exact schools that you share data on, but I've been in that school 100 times this year, in the last year and a half. Once great schools, once very good schools. I'm thinking in particular of a school that I visited about a year ago. This is a high-performing charter in a small industrial city in the Northeast, where if you were a parent in that city, this was the one school that you could send your kid to and know that their learning time would be respected, and that they would be safe as a starting point, and that someone would take their education very, very seriously. I went back to that school in November, and it was, utter chaos. Just no learning happening. And the adults said two things that were really telling to me. One of the things that the head of school said was, just not really sure that adults should be telling young people what to do. How have we gotten to that place where we no longer believe that it is an adult's role to shape a student's experience in life?
The important thing to remember is that the frame for children and adults they serve has to be about hope, and it has to be about agency. And we teach our children that every human being has inherent dignity. That what makes us different as human beings is we have reason and we have free will. We call it free choice. And that we're called to use those two gifts to make the most excellent choices. And we hold our children and help them to make excellent choices. And the anti-racist framework really undermines both hope and agency.
I was recently in England, and I think it's really important that we recognize the different trajectory of schooling in England and in the US. The most recent round of TIMSS data came out today. US TIMSS scores have gone down precipitously in all subject areas. England continues to rise, despite the pandemic, despite a very similar culture, despite even like they're importing many of our ideological beliefs about social justice to England. Those things are quite real in England. And yet their schools are dramatically on the rise. I recently spent 18 months working with a group of schools outside Birmingham, which is, Birmingham is one of the most economically deprived parts of England. These two areas outside of Birmingham, Walsall and Sandwell, where I'm working with a program. It's 18 months funded by the government of very technical pedagogical training for teachers in the schools. Spent 18 months training them, training the leadership, giving them rich PD. It includes both pre and post visits, and those schools at the end of this 18 months were so much better than they were 18 months ago. And the provision of education was so not just quality teaching, but happy, thriving students in what people would say are the most economically deprived neighborhoods in Birmingham. So I walked out of that feeling both like optimistic and depressed at the same time. Be optimistic because it's possible, right? Dramatic change in 18 months, and a little bit depressed because my first thought was that would never happen in the United States. What's the difference?
Thank you.
A couple of things. I think one that in the UK, a head teacher said to me, you almost can't meet an NQT, newly qualified teacher, who has been to a training program where they don't talk about the importance of cognitive load theory, of understanding retrieval practice, of understanding the role of knowledge in reading comprehension. So they have broken the cartel of ideology that shapes teacher training and replaced it with a sector-wide faith in and belief in cognitive science, right? So people make decisions, they can see learning, or they can understand the things that are likely to cause learning to happen. If you can't see those things, of course you replace them with a cheap proxy. I think there's a difference in what people think it means to work for an institution in England. I think when people in England work for a school and the school says, this is what we're going to do, these are our initiatives, we're going to try them, they think it's their obligation to actually do those things.